This is the worst problem in Marvel Spider-Man. And no, I'm not talking about the cutscene. I'm talking about the villains. Not their design or their character development. I actually love that in the game. I'm talking about the boss fights. You see, a hero is only as good as his villains, and if it's easier to fight against them than to fight regular henchmen and thugs, there's gotta be something wrong there. The reason I say this is because the boss fights usually go in one of these two options. You either just let the villain make a mistake and then you're gonna wait for an obvious opportunity to deal the damage, or you can easily create the opportunity by webbing the villain up or using some kind of gadget. If you get the fight against Shocker, for example, all you gotta do is avoid a few blasts here and there, escape when he gets close, and wait for him to cool down. Then you can throw an object and go in and attack. The same idea was also implemented in the first fight against Mr. Negative, where you just keep dodging inside the train until he's out of power, and then you can go beat him because he's completely vulnerable. Now, if we talk about the villains who get vulnerable by Spider-Man's web or gadgets, the list is big because over half of the boss fights get vulnerable by that. Kingpin, Electro, Vulture, Scorpion, Dr. Octavius, Tombstone, Hammerhead, the first and the second fight all can be easily done if you just web them up using Spider-Man's web shooters. They can do absolutely nothing to protect themselves from the webs and nothing to get rid of it fast. So if you just web them up, you have a clear shot at dealing a ton of damage. I just want to make clear that I'm not saying that I want Spider-Man's web to be useless in the boss fights. But what I'm trying to say is that I think the boss should start adapting to Spider-Man as the fight goes along. You know, maybe adding some blocks or some dodging. That would make the fights a lot harder since you wouldn't be able to rely on the gadgets all the time. Because in the way that it is now, you just have to back away, fuel the opponent with webs, they're gonna get vulnerable. You go in, you deal the damage, you back off, you wait for the gadget to replenish, and then you repeat the process. You also have other problems that make you feel like the villains are not a threat for Spider-Man at all. Like, for example, how easily you can avoid the fight against the villain during the boss fight. There are some fights where you can just web swing around and there's literally nothing he can do to catch you. Like against Shocker or even against Dr. Octavius, against Rhino and Scorpion. There's literally nothing they can do to force you to fight them. So you can just swing around, relax, let your gadgets replenish, and be cool. I can also talk about how easily you can avoid the blasts from Electro Shocker. If you compare the time window that you have to dodge either of these boss's blasts with, let's say, a gun from a henchman, you'll see that I have more time to dodge a blast from Shocker or even a lightning from Electro. A lightning is much faster than a bullet, and I have more time to dodge the lightning than I have to dodge the bullet. And there is like no perfect timing for me to dodge the blast from Shocker or Electro. As soon as Spider-Man tingles, I can dodge it, or I can wait until the end of the time window to dodge only at the end, and they'll never catch me. Independently of when I decide to do the dodge, they will never catch me. There are even some moments where I dodge on the beginning of, let's say, Shocker, he's gonna do a blast. I dodge as soon as possible. He still hasn't done the shot and he misses it. It's like I dodged it before he actually did the blast and he still missed me. It's like he couldn't adapt to my movement. And that is just ridiculous, honestly, because it's just too easy to avoid something that should be much harder. Not only because they're bosses, which should be the hardest challenge in the game, but also because, again, we're talking about lightning in the case of Electro, should be much faster than an actual gun. But the biggest proof that I can give you to prove you that even the developers knew that the boss fights are one of the weakest points in the game is how many fights they actually add henchmen or partners. Kingpin, Tombstone, Hammerhead, both fights, and also Mr. Negative on the second fight when he goes into the negative zone, all have henchmen to support them in the fight against Spider-Man. You also have Electro, Vulture, Rhino, and Scorpion, which fight in pairs against him. If the villains were actually strong and a challenge for Spider-Man, do you really think that they would need henchmen to fight against him? Or do you think that they should pair up to stand a chance against him? Don't get me wrong, I love the idea of having Spider-Man fight against two bosses at the same time, but in this game, most of the fights are like that. In most fights, the villain needs support from henchmen or from another villain, and even with the support, the fight continues to be easy. You can see the boss fights on screen right now, and all of the fights were recorded on the ultimate difficulty. I'm talking about the hardest difficulty in the game because honestly, if I'm complaining of how easy it is, I obviously need to play on the hardest difficulty because that's the maximum amount of challenge that the game can offer. But even then, I don't feel like it's enough to satisfy my urge for a good boss fight. Now, even though in general I think the boss fights are not that challenging and that they should improve, I believe that some of the boss fights that we got are very good, and even on the ones that I'm complaining about, I think there are some good elements that they could take to use again and improve their boss fights in the future. But before I tell you what's good about them, I just want to remind you to leave me a thumbs up if you're enjoying this video to support my work, and also subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so that you can keep receiving all my videos. Okay, talking about good boss fights, we have Silver Sable, for example. She has the adaptation that I was talking about early of the web shooters. If you start the fight using it, you're gonna web her up, she's gonna get vulnerable, you can beat her up a little. But after that, she's gonna start blocking using a shield. She's also gonna start blocking throwables, so you're not gonna be able to open her defense like before. You're gonna have to actually fight against her and try to find an opening when you dodge her moves. She also doesn't get vulnerable as easily as the others, because even if you web her up, there is the chance that she will break free. Regarding her fighting moves, she can be very unpredictable when it comes to countering you, because even if you find an opening to deal damage on her, she can counter you at the end of your combo in a way that you can't even dodge or avoid because your spider sense doesn't warn you in time. It's so fast and unpredictable that you kind of have to study if you're going to keep attacking a little more or if you're just going to back off and avoid getting countered. This unpredictability can also be found in the fight against Taskmaster. If you're close to him, there is a chance that out of nowhere he just uses one of your own finishes moves against you, and that deals a ton of damage. Without you even being warned with your spider sense, you can lose almost your entire life bar without even noticing. And the webs and gadgets are gonna be no good here too because he cuts them before they get to him. For you to find an opening, you're gonna have to throw something at him, maybe throw the bombs back, use the dodge under moves to attack him in the back, or dodge at the perfect moment so Spider-Man will counter him and shoot a web in his face, which is exactly how I think a boss fight should go. You should have to fight for an opportunity to deal damage and not just easily get it by webbing the opponent up every time or just waiting for the opponent to make a mistake and then having like 10 seconds of vulnerability to go there and deal a ton of damage. He's also a good example of how it's possible to have a boss fight where you can't evade the villain. You cannot escape him because he goes after you or because he has some tactics to force you into the fight. Because if you try to escape him as Spider-Man, he's gonna trap you with the bolos. I think that's how you call that trap. And you're gonna get trapped. You're gonna have to get rid of it, but while you're doing that, Taskmaster is gonna follow you and he's gonna appear out of nowhere using smoke. So you simply can't just, web swing around safely without having to worry about the boss. No, you gotta fight me. Because if you try to run away, I'm gonna capture you and I'm gonna go after you. Of course, some villains are gonna have trouble trying to force Spider-Man to fight them. But in order for you to fix that problem, you can have that encounter in a close quarters environment, just like you have against Martin Lee in the train. I mean, even though Spider-Man has potential of escaping inside the train, there's not much room for him to web swing or do anything. So you're forced to get the fight. Characters like Rhino, for example, that have absolutely no way for Spider-Man to stay down and fight him, maybe that's a way to force the fight to happen. Since we brought up Martin Lee's fight on the train, I want to mention two positive aspects of it that honestly I think are one of the best things that Insomniac should keep in their fights. The first one is the timing for you to dodge the projectiles or even physical attacks. Because in this fight, the same attack can have different timings for it to come out. Martin Lee can charge his projectiles a little bit longer, or maybe he's gonna throw it a little faster. And depending on how he's gonna do it, you're gonna have to react slower or faster. If he charges a little bit more and you dodge too soon, he's gonna hit you because you dodged it on the wrong time. Just as you can expect him to charge an attack and then you wait before dodging, but then the attack comes up faster and ends up hitting you as well because you weren't expecting it. This unpredictability is great because it actually forces you to pay attention on the move that the villain is doing. It's not like, okay, I see the spider sense icon, I automatically press the dodge button and I don't have to worry about nothing else. This adds up a lot more to the fights, and I think not only adds unpredictability, but also forces you to have a better reaction and to actually look at the villain when he's doing the move and not only to the spider sense icon. And the second thing this fight brings up is the idea of dodging in the right way based on which attack the villain is going to use. If he uses a vertical attack, you gotta dodge to one of your sides, either left or right. Then you're gonna be using the dodge button, which is circle. However, if he uses a horizontal attack, which covers the entire ground area, you're gonna have to jump, so you're gonna have to use X. This may sound silly to you, but I'm gonna put a clip right now of me playing against Martin Lee, the second boss fight, where he also has access to the same attacks where he can attack you vertically or horizontally, and you'll see that every time he attacks me horizontally, even though the attacks are on a row, like he does the attack, then he repeats it, and then he repeats it again, every single time I got caught by it because I'm so used at looking to the spider sense icon and pressing circle that I get caught every time. I don't even pay attention to the move he's going to do. I automatically dodge using circle because 99% of the attacks in this game you dodge by using circle, that I automatically did there and I got caught every time. This little tiny detail of forcing me to dodge in a different way was already enough to make this boss fight much harder for me. Another great example of a boss fight that forces you to dodge differently is the second boss fight against Hammerhead. He's got a laser attack that is gonna follow you for a few seconds. So if you try to dodge it or jump over it, you might be able to avoid the very beginning of the laser, but it's gonna continue for a while, and if you don't get out of there, you're gonna get caught. So for you to avoid that, you're gonna have to maybe jump and web swing out of there. You're gonna have to jump and web zip out of there. You cannot just use the classic dodging or not even a jump. You're gonna have to get out of there. So it's a different way to avoid spider sense will tingle, and you're gonna have to get out of there by using something else. He also has some missiles that follow you, and when they hit the ground, they cover a big circle area. So if you try to just dodge it to one of the sides, you're gonna end up in the area of the missile. You're still gonna get caught, and if you just try to jump it, again, the missile is gonna fall on your head. So again, you're gonna have to jump and web swing out of there, or jump and web zip out of there. And you gotta be careful as well, because once those missiles drop on the floor, they're gonna leave some energy there that Spider-Man cannot touch, or otherwise it's gonna damage him as well. So you're gonna have to be careful to get out of there and not come back as well. All of that actually adds new possibilities for you to get hit, new possibilities for the enemies to become a threat for you, which also causes the boss fights to be more challenging. Now, you can find the boss fights already challenging and good in the way they are, and that's totally fine. Everybody has their opinion. But the reason why I think this is a huge problem and is not something that is only my opinion is because I'm not the best player of Marvel Spider-Man. I'm just a guy who loves Spider-Man and has played the other Spider-Man games in the past and that plays a lot of video game. So when I get to Marvel Spider-Man, I want some challenging, as a lot of people who play video games does. And the game doesn't really give that to me, especially when we get to the boss fights. And as a Spider-Man fan, that's exactly what I expect the most, the villains. I want to see the villains and have Spidey fighting them. It's the most exciting part of the game for me. And I want that to be challenging. And if the hardest difficulty doesn't give me that challenge, then there's nothing left for me to do. I cannot make the game harder myself. I need the developers to do that for me, because again, I have nowhere to go after the hardest difficulty. And I keep imagining the situation for those hardcore Marvel Spider-Man players who know the advanced mechanics, are very good in combat. For them, the situation is even worse, and I'm not even close to being one of those great players. So I think a lot of people are included here and would enjoy a more challenging experience, especially against the bosses. But I'm very confident that Insomniac will deliver an even better experience in Marvel Spider-Man 2. I really believe that because I can see a lot of improvements in Miles Morales. The boss fights that you have against Prowler and Tinker are exactly what I expected boss fights to be. If you've played that game, if you look at the boss fights, you'll see that all these downsides that I mentioned here from Marvel Spider-Man, they are not present in those boss fights. You can see that all of those great things that I believe should have in the game are present there as well. They don't let you escape easily. They are not easily webbed up. They don't get vulnerable easily. They don't really make mistakes so that you can just stay safe and wait for them to get vulnerable. They don't do that. You gotta fight for your opportunity to actually stand a chance of dealing damage. So everything that I said that I'd like for a boss fight, Miles Morales got it right with the Prowler and with Tinkerer. Rhino, it's not so bad too, I'm not gonna lie. I really enjoyed the fights against Rhino. They still have some aspects like having henchmen, like easily creating your opportunity using Venom attacks, but again, it's the fight against Rhino. Rhino's a little harder because of his size and the way the fight would go. But with Prowler and Tinkerer, it was pretty much close to perfection for me, if not perfect. And I think in Marvel Spider-Man 2, they already learned with the first game, with Miles Morales, and they are gonna make it just perfect in the next one. Now I want to know your opinion and your thoughts. Do you agree with me? Do you believe that the boss fights are actually the most important aspect of a superhero game, considering that, again, a hero is only as good as his villains? Do you believe that these fights are not really that challenging, or they are already good enough for you? What do you expect to see in Marvel Spider-Man 2? Leave your thoughts and suggestions in the comments. Discuss with me because I love making these videos to discuss with you guys. I'm very excited for this game. I'm gonna do everything I can to get a PS5 in the game until October 20. And I hope that if you're in the same situation as me, you can also get the PS5 in the game in time to play it as soon as it releases. Don't forget to leave that thumbs up if you haven't already, and subscribe to the channel to receive more content like this and to watch my other videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later!